Are you ready for Wrestling Book Club? Because, baby, we are about to get into some fun. Now, I am your host, your commentator, your moderator, your friend, your president, the one and only Psychdesigntvtoo, aka Tiffany E. And I am here to facilitate and talk about the book that we are going to be reading. Now, this one is going to be a fun one. This one is Becky Lynch's The Man book. Now, I have been doing my damnedest to try to get this part of the book out to you guys, and I know that I am a couple weeks late, but I had some minor setbacks. I got sick. Shit's been real here at home, but you know what? We're about to dive into this. Okay? So, welcome back to the pod over here on Psychdesigntvtoo's channel in the United States of Tiffany. Okay? Welcome back. We're going to be talking about Becky Lynch's book, The Man. And I am going to tell you right now that you are in for a treat if you read this book. The way that it is written, it conveys through Becky's humor and personality. And it's such a loving, fun read. And it gives you such insight into her and how she got to where she is. The rebel and the fighter in her has been instilled in her since birth, and Becky just has a way of telling stories that captivates you, that makes you laugh. It's funny, and even in some of the roughest times of her life, she's able to convey these rough and hard things to you in a humorous and fun way that makes the situation a little bit lighter than it actually is. There are some parts of this book that are a little bit heavy for you, but Becky turns it into a situation that can make you think that maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed, or maybe she's been able to heal and deal with it differently. So those hard and rough times don't look as dark and bleak to us because Becky's conveying it from a place of healing and happiness, which I think she actually did. She just has a way of shining a light and being a sunshine in some of the darkest of places. So first things first, let's get into the first chapter of Becky Lynch The Man. The Becky Lynch The Man book starts out with Becky explaining how she was going to tell Vince McMahon that she was pregnant. She and her fiance, Seth freaking Rollins, aka Kobe, had decided that it was time to have a baby. It was 2020. Everything was shut down. Life was at full stop. No one knew when normalcy was going to return. And Becky and Kobe had to make a decision. It was now or never. They knew that once the world restarted and things were going back to normal, that their lives would go back to the fast track and there would not be time to actually slow down and stop and smell the roses. So they decided to take fate into their own hands and start to procreate as soon as they could. They made the decision to have their baby, despite the fact that they knew that this could halt some things within the WWE, and this also could cause some discord for Becky specifically, being as how she was the Raw Women's Champion and the longest reigning Raw Women's Champion. How would she drop the title? How would she do this? How would things proceed? Those were all questions that Becky was asking herself, and more specifically, how was Vince McMahon going to respond to her blessing of news? Well, she mulled over this decision constantly, scared to tell him, coming up with different ways that she can, utilize the time frame of her being pregnant. And well, her fiance, Seth, aka Kobe, just basically told her, like, hey, you just have to tell him. And she says, okay. She goes outside. She calls him. He doesn't answer. She comes inside with a little bit of a relief, and then she goes and tries to sit down, and then he calls her back. And this is when Becky tells Vince that she's pregnant. And to her surprise, he's very happy for her. He's very, over the moon and telling her that, he's happy for her, and he hopes that she has a beautiful bouncing baby. I mean, he was all in, and she was super, super shocked because, of course, it's Vince McMahon and he has his plans and everything has to go his way. This is how the book starts. And then Becky goes into her time as a child. She detailed prior to the time, her childhood, she detailed how she wanted Shayna Baszler to take the title off of her. This was before she had made the decision to be pregnant or any of that. She felt that the crowd was losing interest in her, and eventually the best thing to do, as well as to give the women's division somebody new at the top of the mountain, the best thing to do was to start over and to give you a new fresh start with a new fresh champion. Shayna was already a heel. She already had the heat. So the best thing for her to do was to utilize that heat and push forward automatically. Well, Vince and Co. were not happy with that. They vetoed that immediately. And Becky went on ahead as planned to continue to wrestle Shayna at Mania and eventually win against Shayna Baszler at Mania. She didn't want to, but she did like she was told, just like every other champion before her had to do. And even though Shayna Baszler was the one she wanted to give the women's division a fresh new face, she knew that she had to do what was needed to be done, even with her own plans of her getting pregnant needed to happen. Meanwhile, she was already pregnant. The entire time that she wrestled Shayna Baszler, she was pregnant. And this was not a pregnancy that she did not plan. She planned this. Now, sidebar, I thought that she just popped up pregnant and wrestled and didn't know she was pregnant. But luckily, she was able to wrestle and was pregnant and didn't lose her child. Because my God, like, I can't even think about the consequences. I'm just going to say thank God that she's okay, the baby's okay, Seth's okay. That's all I can say to that. Because I would have been freaking out if I was pregnant and I'm wrestling. I would have been freaking out. But, like I said, Vince vetoed dropping the title. And so Becky Lynch ended up retaining. Eventually, she would give up her title. If you were not watching during the pandemic era, then you wouldn't know that Becky did give up her title. Eventually, that title was given to Asuka inside the briefcase for Money in the Bank, which I highly recommend that you go back and watch that Money in the Bank, because as chaotic as the pandemic era was, that was truly a fun time. Like, I actually enjoyed that so much. It was so eerie, but so fun at the same time. I low-key wish they were able to put like laugh tracks in the background and kind of like have some sound in there, because that would have just made it a little bit more oof, give it a little bit more zhuzh. But overall, it was such a unique time for them to be playful with things that they never could ever do, and this was one of them. Money in the Bank in Titan Tower is definitely a rewatchable pay-per-view that a lot of people have been sleeping on. It's actually a really good time. Moving on. We're going into her childhood. Becky Lynch details how she was born on January 30th, okay? And she loved her mother. She was in awe of the beauty of her mother. Her mother was a model by trade, and then she ended up being a flight attendant later on in life once modeling no longer sustained the family. But Becky mother was a beauty, and she thought of herself to not be one. Becky was a bit of a porker, pour her own words. I think she was just a little bit of a thickums. I don't think she was a chubbawamba like me. I think she was just a little thick. If she had to grow up where we grew up, child, she would have had all the confidence in the world, honey. Okay? Because little girls like that came a dime a dozen. And most of the times when you're a little kid and you love to eat, which Becky does love to eat, you're going to pick up pounds, But Becky made it very clear that she was in awe of her mother's beauty, and her mother was a model, and like I said, later on she became a flight attendant. And Becky didn't believe that she was, beautiful. Like, she thought that she was a little thicker than most of the kids. When it came to her her father was charming and a dreamer. He was the kind of person who never really kept a steady job. He didn't really have, you know, anything stable, but he had the dream. He had the lights. His eyes were always in the stars. And that can be a recipe for disaster for relationships. And it was for her and her parents. Becky Lynch's parents stayed together as long as they could, but it didn't last. It became a little bit difficult for them to maintain their relationship. And her mom just decided that the best thing for them to do was to separate. Now, they separated, yes, but they did not separate the home. So while Becky's mom and dad were no longer together, they still lived together in the house, which I thought was a very interesting concept, especially for her parents during that time. You know, it was obvious. I mean, getting a divorce wasn't like taboo. It wasn't that. It was the idea of living together and being divorced. You know, both of them was going to have to date and things were going to be different. The kids are going to have to feel, different. But from what Becky said, it felt like a normal home to her. She didn't feel anything different. She didn't feel like life sucked or my parents hate each other and they're living in the house together. Like, she felt as though her parents provided her with the best case scenario of a bad situation. Sorry. She just was like, yeah, my parents, they just shouldn't have been together, with the way that my father was and how my mother was the more practical, stable one. And my dad was the drifter, the dreamer, the always head in the clouds type of guy. She felt that it was best that her parents weren't together. They worked better apart than they did together. And she got the best of both worlds. She got to see a stable co-parenting relationship between her parents, and she still got to have both of her parents in her life simultaneously. So Becky was pretty happy with the situation that she had. Her family consisted of her mother, her father, and her brother, Richie. I believe her brother's name was Richie. Now, Becky, like I said, was a little bit of a porker back in the day. And because of that, she was teased for her weight. Now, Becky got, there's a new kid that moved into town that she details in this book. And the kid, she hated the kid. He was that popular because he could sing and everybody loved to hear him sing, and she hated him. Mainly because he was a little shit. He liked to tease her, he liked to, call her names. And there's a point where she explains where she used to swing in her house. And because they would swing at this particular swing, there was a divot in the ground from where their feet would constantly drag on the ground in front of the swing. So she jumped off the swing and fell on the ground in that divot. The little boy was sitting in the tree and basically made fun that Becky fell off the swing. And when she got up, the divot was in the ground, and he basically said Becky put a dip in the ground. Not only that, but a little bit later in the book, they talk about her going to the park and somebody wrote all over the seesaw, Becky's name and calling her fat and everything. It is really, really disgusting. I don't think that I got teased like that, but then I was mean when I was a kid. I'll tell you a story before we finish this. I was a bitch back in the day, and I had been known to be that way, and it was a defense mechanism for me, mainly because I knew, and I was, informed very early when I was a kid by my father, who also is a bigger man, and he understood that me being a bigger woman, I was going to go through a lot of hell, so to deviate from some of that hell, he's like, listen, you're gonna have to protect yourself. You're gonna have a lot of people calling you names, making fun of you because you're fat. And he said it's either fight or flight with you. All right. And he said, you are not no weak person, and you're not gonna let nobody bully you. You defend yourself if you have to. And so instead of me having to fight, I put the fear of God in you before we have to fight. If I have to come to blows, I'm gonna hurt you. But because I didn't have to do that but once, which I'll tell that story on a different day, I didn't have to do that but once in my life. Everybody pretty much understood where I was coming from once they saw me and once they talked to me. If things got out of hand or it escalated, I made it very clear where I stood and what I was going to do. And that's how I got people off of me. Becky, however, was like a 6-year old kid in this part of the book. So there was no way she was going to be able to do that. But, I was taught very early, even at the tender age of 5, they're going to call you names, they're going to talk about you, and you don't let them do that. If they put their hands on you, you beat your ass. Like, I mean, I'm defending myself at that point, My father was very adamant about making sure that I understood that. And I did. I got the message. Anyways, little lesson in bullying. Anyways, I didn't bully. I didn't bully other people, but I did. Yeah. Anyways, let's get back to the book. So, to get back to Becky, this was when we get to the parts that Becky talks about. Some of these parts of this book is crazy. Okay? But Becky's mom, like I told you guys, was a flight attendant, and she loved going with her mother because she could damn near fly for free because her mom was a flight attendant, babes, which is probably one of the coolest flexes you can have ever, okay? But babes, listen, Becky says she fell in love with America when she would fly with her mom, and she ended up coming over to the States, and she would go with her mother, and she would just be flying and just having a time of her life. She said she came over to the States once and she went to McDonald's, and this man was sitting down in his chair right across from them. And Becky is an eater. Do you hear me? Becky had a whole double quarter pounder. I think she was like 10 or 11 at this point. Becky had a whole double quarter pounder with cheese, fries, and a Coke. Becky was not playing with the girls, okay? She was like, give me all of it. Give it to me. I want to eat. And I fucks with that. I do. I fucks with it heavy, bitch. But anyways, Becky was sitting down and she said there was some man that came up. They went to Boston, I think. I don't know if they were in New York. No, they were in Boston. And she said this man was sitting there and he was rubbing on his thumb. And she was like, huh, why are you rubbing on your thumb under the table? And she looked again, and he kept like staring at them. He kept staring at them. And she knew that the man must have been staring at her mom because her mom was a beautiful woman. And she knew that her mother, being a model, was going to attract people no matter what, right? But she realized that this man was not playing with his thumb. Okay? It wasn't his thumb. It was another extremity. That's of the nether regions. Okay? This man was sitting at the table at McDonald's with his pants down and had his other thumb out and was giving himself the business. Girl, if I'm lying, I'm crying. Okay? Like I said, girl, what? And I'm reading this and I just exclaimed that when I read that part. I said, girl, what? Oh my God. And Becky ran out of there. She was like, I gotta go. And her mom didn't understand why she wanted to leave so much. And I don't think she ever told her mother that that's what she saw. But after that, she was like, basically, she don't never want to see a lower extremity on a man or go to Boston for a while. That turned her off in Boston. I'm not going to say nothing. A couple years go by and Becky is a very rebellious, very inquisitive, trouble-seeking child. She likes to go and have fun and really be on the edge of life and enjoy life. She inherited her father's nature of being a dreamer, but she also had her mom's practicality to a certain extent. Her brother was a bit more of a good mix of both of them, whereas he could see something, understood how to execute it, would execute it, and wouldn't wait for life to bring it to him. He would go and get it. Becky was more of a rebel because she wanted to do things that were batshit bonkers to most people, but to her, it felt right and it sounded right, you know? So Becky's mom had been single for a long time, and eventually she ended up meeting a man. And this is where things started to shift for Becky. She didn't want to share her mother, but she also felt her life beginning to change because her mother started dating this man. And before she knew it, it did. So Becky pretty much had a very stable home life. They lived, I guess you could say, per American standards, it was a very middle class life. They lived in a middle class neighborhood. The house was nice. The neighborhood was good. They didn't have to worry about a lot. Their mom worked, but you know, it wasn't to the bone, you know. Now, afterwards, when Becky's mom met this man, she decided to move closer to him because he also was divorced and had kids. He didn't want to move his kids and uproot his kids. So Becky's mom made the decision to move and uproot her family. And this was not just to uproot her family, but this was a way to, one, finally and physically separate from Becky's dad because he was still living in the home at the time. This was a way to finally sever ties with him completely and also give the kids a fresh new start. And Becky and her brother were dead set against this. They did not want to move. They did not want to change their lives. And Becky's mom had was done. You know, she sold the house and she moved to a new house that was in a rougher neighborhood. And, you know, things were not looking up when Becky and the family moved. And while her mom was happy, you know, to be away from the dad and to be in this new relationship, Becky and her brother were upset. And because of that, teenage rebellious nature came and took over. And it was very heavy in Becky, and it was present in her brother. They both partook in drugs and drinking. And Becky was very much into smoking pot and just being outright rebellious and disrespectful to her mom, which she details in this book. Um, Now, like I said, they moved, and when they moved, I forgot to tell you a little tidbit. They moved right next door to the boyfriend. The boyfriend lived in this really dodgy neighborhood, which really took me aback a little bit because if I wanted to be by my boyfriend, like let's say I had like kids and I divorced my husband and I wanted to be close to my boyfriend, like I would move in town, but I would never move next door because like what if that shit don't work out? Then you're stuck living next door to your ex-boyfriend. Ew, no, not doing that. I would have moved in a decent apartment, you know, a good 3 bedroom apartment with my kids. Never would have bought no rundown house in no terrible neighborhood. Absolutely not. Or I would have just kicked my ex-husband out of the house and be like, hey, I need you to find a place to stay. You have 30 days. And then I would have looked for a place, you know, and I would have made it work so that my kids can be happy. I'm sorry, but I mean, even though, and I'm not shitting on Becky's mom, like I know Becky's mom did what she thought was best, and Becky doesn't hate her. They just had their moments, you know. But if it had been me, like my kids would have come first every day, all day, and I would have kicked my ex-husband out the house so I could have some peace. Like my ex-husband got to find his own way. I'm not gonna take care of him. He is more than welcome to come by and take care of the kids for me if I have to go out. He is more than welcome to come and you know sit with the kids, be there for them, all that good shit. But girl, absolutely the fuck not if you think I'm gonna have you laying up in my house while I'm trying to take care of business. I'm working and you laying up in my house? Oh no, honey. That's not gonna happen. Mm-mm. So, to get off of my little rant. It just felt weird that she moved all of her family right next door to a man that she didn't even know she was gonna marry. But it seemed like she did eventually end up marrying him. But it was just weird. I would have moved into a better environment for my kids. At least that's just me. But no shame on Becky's mom. Just want to make sure there's no shame on Becky's mom. Her brother, she describes her brother Richie as an artist. She thought that her brother was very artistically gifted, and he also was very unhappy with the changes as long as just as much as she was. They both were rebelling, but Becky was rebelling the most. She did not want to be uprooted. She did not want to leave her dad behind. She was okay with them being separated, but for her not to be able to see him the way she used to, not to be in her old neighborhood, like she was really upset about the changes that was happening in her life. And she made sure her mother knew it. She gave her mother hell. Um, she was the kind of kid who voiced her frustrations vehemently to her mother. Her mother was tired and exhausted from working and then having to deal with Becky's antics and her brother's antics. It just was a lot. It was a lot on her. So her brother was very into wrestling. She wasn't in the beginning. She saw it in passing and she was like, whatever. Her brother loved it. He was enthralled with it. He enjoyed it, you know. But Becky didn't really get into wrestling until Mick Foley came on the screen. Becky started watching wrestling around Mick Foley's era of wrestling, and that's when Becky fell in love. She was like, he wasn't an average looking guy. He wasn't, because in the WWE and in WCW at the time, and just in wrestling in general, there was a particular look that was acceptable for wrestlers during that time. You had to be, you know, a well sculpted, crafted man. You needed to be right and tight, if you will. Okay. You had to have the body, you know, you had to have the chiseled face, the beautiful looks. Um, that was a thing during that time. And Mick Foley was the opposite. Mick Foley was your average, everyday guy that was throwing himself off of cages and, you know, bang, bang everywhere. I loved Cactus Jack. I was infatuated with Cactus Jack. I liked Mick Foley. I think Mick Foley was awesome, and he's just genuinely a good person, you know. But anyways, she was infatuated with him. She loved him, and that's how she got into wrestling was through Mick Foley. So I know meeting Mick Foley when she started working there had to be a dream come true for her. But anyways, like I said before, she was a troubled teen, smoked a lot of pot, cut school a lot, hung out with the wrong crowd, was very much, you know, into the F you, mom, I'm not doing what you say type of situation, you know. And that was Becky's life, you know. She was not trying to get into this, you know, new I don't want to go to school. I don't want to do any of that. I'm going to do what I want. But after a while, Becky started to see the toll that it took on her mom. So she decided that she was going to get herself together. And this was around the time, like I said, she had discovered wrestling and, you know, she realized that this is something that she might want to do. Her brother Richie had came across a website, and this was called NWA Hammerlock. And NWA Hammerlock was a new school that was being sprung up, and they were interested in new recruits, and you had to pay a fee, you know, bring your fee, sign up, and you can, you know where the school is training, and you can go and train to be a wrestler. Well, her brother signed up. She saw her brother signed up. She was like, I want to be a wrestler too. I want to do it. And, you know, he basically was like, no, no, you're not going to do that. And Becky was like, I want to do it. Like, she watched Tough Enough. She was like, oh my God, this looks so easy. Like, let's do this. She saw some of the people complaining about the bumps and the bruises. And she was like, stop acting like a bitch and man up. Like, Becky was very much one of those types of fans that just thought she could do anything and everything that everybody was doing on TV and nothing would ever go wrong and you'd be fine. And so Becky decided that she was gonna, you know, finagle her way into joining the school. Now, her brother wrote a letter to the NWA Hammerlock website to and got the school and, you know, signed up. He got a return letter 2 weeks later telling him that he was accepted and that here's where he needed to go to sign up. Um, there was a new school opening in their area that he could go to learn the basics and possibly get some get some things worked out. And so they sent him to that place first, but he was accepted to NWA Hammerlock. Um, their new trainers over at this new school that was opening in their area was DeWitt and Tracy. And I believe that those two guys are now known as Finn Balor and Sheamus. So there's that. Becky was determined to go to this school. There was no, no fee. There was a fee. It was a small fee. I think it was like $19, I want to say, for the initial fee. But Becky was excited. She had dreamed of doing this, and her brother had refused to take her. He refused to take her. He was like, "You're not coming with me. You have to be of a certain age," which I think you had to be 17, and Becky was like 15 at the time. And it was like, "You can't come. Like, I'm not going through this with you." Um, and so, he was done. So Becky had to find another way to get there. So she went to her father. And her father being the dreamer and the the one the Millie Bobby Brown thing meme was playing in my head, and I hope I can find it so I can put it on there. But Becky's father was a dreamer, so he was all for it. No matter how dangerous or crazy it sounded, he was gonna let you try it. And so she was like, "Dad, I'm going to this place. I need you to take me. It's for wrestling." I think she did tell her father what it was for, so he knew. But he was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll take you, no problem." So he ended up taking her. And she had these magical, whimsical dreams of what this place looked like. And when she got there, it was nothing of the sort. It was like a high school gymnasium. She walked in and she saw DeWitt there with the sign in sheet. And she was like, "I had this crazy idea that I was gonna, figure out a way to hide my age because she's still underage and they don't know this." And she's coming in. She put her money down, and he smiled, said hi. Here's the sign up. Becky signed up, never said anything. Asked him how she did. None of that. Just got the money. She gave him his money, and she went inside. She skipped in. She was like, "Phew, made it." She got in, and her brother was there. And of course, her brother was mortified that she was there. And she kept like following him around like a little lost puppy. And he was just like, "Stop following me," typical brother shit. Anyways, she was in love with Finn Balor when she first started wrestling. And Becky was like, she said he was handsome and everything. And she was just like, infatuated with him like any other girl would be. I mean, to be honest, Finn has a a pretty cool aura about him, and he has beautiful eyes. I can see why a lot of women would like Finn Balor. Beautiful eyes. Um, when she got inside, they got right to work immediately, learning how to take bumps. Becky was not good at any of this initially. She learned as she progressed, but that progression was very, very long. Becky was taking bumps and bruises and getting banged up, and she would hide this from her mom, and she would hide this from anybody else. And she kept going to the school learning, and she knew she was bad. She knew she was bad, but she was unwaveringly optimistic, which is a trait she gets from her father. However, Becky's tenacity and dedication to this would eventually get her caught. She lied what she was doing to her mom, and her mom found out later on. Like, her mom thought she was going to register for like I think it was like some type of like jujitsu class or karate class or something. And her mom found out about the um the wrestling and they started arguing. It got really, really bad. And they got into a full blown fight. And she was like, "You could break your neck." And Becky's like, "I could break my neck just walking down the street, mom. Like, it's not that big of a deal." And she's just like, "I don't want you to do this." And they're just going back and forth. They're going back and forth. They eventually came to an agreement that Becky could continue to do this, but she would be extremely careful. Her mother had just got exhausted and just gave up. And I think Becky knows now that she gave her mother so much hell that she didn't have to give her. And I think in her older age and now having a daughter of her own, she will understand, and that she does understand, that her mother was only trying to protect her because she was her only daughter. She was her baby, you know, and to see her child come home with a stinger, it's got to be nuts. And then she's got bruising all over her back. So what happened was Becky had forgot that she was, doing all of this stuff, and these wrestling gives you wounds, babe. Like, you're running the ropes. You think you're just gonna run the ropes and everything's fine. Like, no, you're gonna have some bruising, some lining on your back from running those ropes. Those ropes are unforgiving. And she forgot one day and wore a backless, like, shirt, and it caused an uproar in her house. That's how her mother found out about her learning to wrestle. Um, as this book progresses, it goes on to explain that Becky had been training for months and she was getting into learning a crucifix pin. And she got a new partner in learning how to do this crucifix pin. And after she did this guy dropped her on her neck and gave her quite the stinger. She was in serious pain. She went to her father, told her dad what happened. Her dad took her to a local pub where there was a doctor there. And he kind of looked her over and was like, because he had talked to some wrestlers before, if I recall, so he understood the injury. Well, no, he was like a sports doctor. He did, like, he had something, and Becky told him what she was doing while she did when she did the how she got the injury, and he was like, "Okay, so what you have is a stinger," and he told her what she can do to help with her recovery for it, but it wasn't anything life threatening, and she wasn't going to have to stop wrestling, but she did need to take a break and kind of relax and get herself readjusted, and then she can go back into doing what she's doing. But this is a catalyst of the job, unfortunately. And that was the end of the fifth chapter. These 5 episodes, chapters were really, really interesting because they took you through Becky's life from start to finish in terms of her early years, how she developed, and where she started to get her love of wrestling. And it did it in a quick way, but in a way to where it flowed decently and it wasn't just long and drawn out and drab and mundane. This book is a fun read. If you haven't read it, you definitely should. In 2 weeks or next week, you're going to get the next 5 chapters. We're going to have a good time reading Becky's book. I'm going to try to spread this out as much as possible so you guys can have time to get the book, possibly catch up, and I won't have to spread it out, over months and months and months. I know I said earlier I would try to do it like maybe, 10 chapters a month, but I think I can do better than that. You're reading 5 chapters in a week. It's not the end of the world. If you're listening to it on Audible or some of the other audio book websites, it's even easier to listen to. Sometimes you're listening to this book and you don't even realize how far you've gotten into it. That's how good Becky has narrated it and how well it was written. I highly recommend it to all of you. I will link all the places you can get Becky's book in the description box below. And I hope you guys partake and read this book with me. Let me know what you think about the book. If you agree that Becky's mom moving next to her boyfriend without having no confirmation of, a ring or nothing is crazy. Uprooting her family to go live in squalor is crazy. Okay. Uh, and comment below if you agree that Becky was giving her mom a hard time and was being unrelentingly a brat. She was being a brat. A rebellious teen is a lot to say in this particular book. But girl, you was giving your mama a lot of trouble and a lot of hell. And my mama always told me, listen, one day you gonna have some kids and your daughter gonna give you twice as much of the hell as you gave me. And I guarantee you, BOOKCLUB, if you don't get your shit together, little Rue gonna be running around tearing your head off, girl. But anyway, anyways, and let me know if you agree in the comment section if you believe that Becky was out here dipping it and doing it, honey. Becky was living her best life, honey. Let me know what you think about these 5 chapters of this book. I'm going to read the next chapters and get you guys the next one next week. I am your girl, your host, your commentator, your moderator, Tiffany E. of the United States of Tiffany. And I will see you guys at the next Wrestling Book Club. Love yas.